The QAnon Shaman. You probably know of him from the January 6th storming of the Capitol. Arguably, he's probably the most recognizable person that was involved that day, thanks to the fact that he was wearing very colorful face paint and fur and horns. And as you're probably aware, just like many of the other people that were involved that day, the QAnon Shaman was indicted on charges for the storming of the Capitol. Now, just the other day, it was reported that his attorney made some very interesting comments, to say the least, as to the defenses that they may be using for the QAnon Shaman, also known as Jacob Chansley. The comments were definitely colorful, to say the least, and not exactly my style as an attorney, but I get it. My style is not everyone's. Anyway, in this video, we'll get into those comments and what they might mean for the prosecution of this case, and some of my thoughts on it. Coming up on Legal Bytes. Hey everyone, welcome to Legal Bytes. I'm Alita, I'm a lawyer, and on this channel we explain the law one bite at a time. And really quick before we get into it, if you are enjoying this or you find it interesting or informative, please do hit the like button. It really does help our channel grow. And on that note, we're right around 3,400 subscribers, reaching for 4,000, ultimately going to our first 10,000 subscribers. We're more than a third of the way there now. And if you haven't already and you want to see us grow and you want to join us as we grow, hit the subscribe button and a notification bell. It really does help us in our journey to our first 10,000 subscribers. Anyway, let's get into it. So no matter what, in any case, whether it's a strong case or a very weak case, an attorney involved in any lawsuit has a duty to zealously advocate for their client. And that zealous advocacy can take many different shapes and sizes, apparently. In this particular case, the attorney here for the QAnon Shaman recently made some comments that are colorful, to say the least, maybe by some standards incredibly offensive. Basically, the attorney said two main things. Number one, his client has Aspergers, and apparently, to paraphrase and to sort of clean it up a little bit, that most, if not all of these people involved on that day were people that have diminished capacity, intelligence, understanding, that kind of thing. And then the other thing that he said was that basically all of these people were incredibly susceptible to the, propaganda machine that was out there for Donald Trump to influence these people in an undue manner. And then essentially he compared Trump to Hitler. Okay, so let's take a look at what those comments exactly were. According to The Hill, the QAnon Shaman's attorney basically said that the world hasn't seen propaganda like Trump's since Hitler. So looking directly at this article by The Hill, it says, Watkins, the attorney for the QAnon Shaman, told Talking Points Memo that Chansley has Asperger Syndrome, arguing that his client's mental state and the influence of former President Trump's propaganda efforts would play a role in this case. And then there's the direct quote from the attorney, which I will clean up a little bit as I read along so that it can be available to a bit of a wider audience here. He said, a lot of these defendants, and I'm going to use this colloquial term, perhaps disrespectfully, but they're all effing short bus people. These are people with brain damage. They're effing something. They're on the goddamn spectrum, Watkins told the outlet. But they're our brothers, our sisters, our neighbors, our coworkers. They're part of our country. These aren't bad people. They don't have prior criminal history. They were subjected to 4+ years of goddamn propaganda, the likes of which the world has not seen since effing Hitler, he added. So obviously the QAnon Shaman has found an attorney who is just about as colorful as he is. On the one hand, it is very interesting to see this kind of an argument come out from someone who is supposed to be one of Trump's most ardent supporters. A lot of these people that were involved on that January 6th riot, maybe even all of them were probably some of Trump's most ardent supporters. But now that these criminal charges have been filed, I would expect to see a lot of this kind of defense and this kind of rhetoric coming from the defendants and particularly from their attorneys. And that doesn't surprise me because their hide is what's on the line after all. People are going to do what they can to protect themselves, and their attorneys are going to do what they can to protect their clients, regardless of whether that makes their client look a little bit stupid. So to me, this does seem like an attorney who is being a zealous advocate for his client. After all, if you take on a defense of a criminal case, you need to try to put on some kind of a defense. You have to find some kind of a plausible argument, because otherwise you're not doing your job as an attorney. Regardless of whether it's going to win or it's not going to win, you still have to do your best work. In this case, though, it seems like he might be overdoing it. Now, focusing on the part about his client having Asperger's, there might be two reasons that I can see why he might be using this. The first would be to try to establish an insanity defense, and the second would be to put up a defense on the element of intent. So let's look at the insanity defense first. Now, there are several different types of insanity defenses. However, there's one that is more common than others. and it's one that's recognized in federal law under the Comprehensive Crime Control Act. Under this kind of defense, the defendant would need clear and convincing evidence to prove that they have a certain mental defect that is so severe that they couldn't understand the nature or quality or wrongness of the act. And to clarify, in a criminal case, generally speaking, the burden of proof is on the prosecution to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did the thing that was illegal. The burden typically doesn't fall on the defendant to disprove. However, it's generally best practice for a defense attorney to try to put on evidence to do so. However, because the insanity defense is an affirmative defense, the burden is on the defendant to prove that the insanity defense actually applies in this case. Now, turning to the other reason why I think the defense attorney might be bringing up the issue of Asperger's and people being on the spectrum is the issue of intent. You see, even if an insanity defense doesn't apply in a certain situation, the defense can still attack the element of intent. And that's because in any kind of a case, as I mentioned before, the prosecution has the burden of proving every element of the crime. And generally speaking, in any crime, you have to prove that there was not just a criminal act, but also criminal intent. And to prove intent, the prosecution has to show that the defendant made a conscious decision to deliberately engage in the activity that actually was illegal. That deliberate decision can be purposeful, knowing, reckless, or even negligent, depending on the crime that we're talking about. So in any case, the defense is going to try to bring in any kind of evidence showing that the defendant didn't have the criminal intent required, or even couldn't have had the criminal intent required for that case. So does Asperger's fit into either one of these situations? In other words, can Asperger's be used as a defense in a criminal case like this? Well, let's start with what Asperger's actually is. Now, I'm not a doctor, but what I do know about Asperger's is that it is a medical condition that places a person on the autism spectrum. Specifically, it falls under the umbrella of the autism spectrum disorder. Asperger's, or Asperger Syndrome, is considered to be one of the milder conditions on the spectrum. But basically, my understanding of Asperger's is that it causes a diminished capacity to read and understand certain people's emotional nonverbal cues. So if someone says something, but their body language suggests something different, someone with Asperger's might take for granted the things that someone said and not be able to understand what it is that their body language was telling them. And you may or may not know this, but there are actually some famous people that have Asperger's. For example, Anthony Hopkins recently revealed, I think in 2017, that he actually was diagnosed as an adult with Asperger's. Apparently, he said that it was triggered because his wife, quote, wanted to know who she was married to. So after some tests, he learned that he in fact had Asperger's. Considering the fact that Asperger's affects someone's ability to read and understand nonverbal cues, the fact that Anthony Hopkins has it is kind of amazing. I mean, I don't think I really need to go into his acting credentials to show just how powerful of an actor he is. And obviously, acting involves some sort of mirroring of people's emotions and people's body language and verbal and nonverbal cues alike. So it's really kind of incredible that he has Asperger's.
My God. I can't believe it. This is really unexpected. It's a great honor to be here, especially with such great actors like.
Now, another person that recently revealed that he has Asperger's is Elon Musk. When he recently hosted Saturday Night Live, he said he was proud to be the first person with Asperger's to host SNL.
Sometimes after I say something, I have to say, I mean that. So people really know that I mean it. That's because I don't always have a lot of intonation or variation in how I speak. I'm actually making history tonight as the first person with Asperger's to host SNL.
Now, as I mentioned before, Asperger's falls on the autism spectrum, and being on a spectrum, that would suggest that there is a range of ways that autism can show up in a person. And as you can see, there are examples of people that have Asperger's that have been able to have very, very successful lives. But of course, there are arguably many other people that are dealing with Asperger's in various ways that are different than those two examples. So looking back at the case of the QAnon Shaman and the reasons why the attorney may have brought up Asperger's, Can Asperger's be used as an insanity defense? Well, I'm not a doctor, and I'm certainly not a medical expert in any form. However, in order for the insanity defense to be used, that mental defect has to affect the way in which a person can understand the wrongness of the act itself. And to my understanding, Asperger's doesn't exactly impact that. Like I said, it impacts their ability to read and understand nonverbal cues by other people. So as far as the insanity defense goes, I'd be interested to see if the attorney brings in certain facts about his case, but I really don't think that that would be a good argument for that. Now, what about using it, generally speaking, to poke holes in the prosecution's argument that the QAnon Shaman had the requisite criminal intent for the act? Well, the act that we're talking about here was someone that was storming the Capitol. None of the QAnon Shaman's acts involved any sort of a reading or understanding of very subtle nonverbal cues. Now, the argument could be made, and maybe will be made, that the QAnon Shaman didn't understand the communications being made by the president in his speech in the rally shortly before the storming of the Capitol. However, to me, that just doesn't sound like a convincing argument. So I really don't think that Asperger's is the kind of condition that can really play a role as a defense in this kind of a case. Now, if we were talking about a case involving, say, sexual assault, I could see Asperger's coming up as a possible defense in a case like that. And that's because cases involving sexual assault very often involve some sort of communication going on between two people that can get misinterpreted. Or at least there can be an argument that they've been misinterpreted. And a lot of those communications can be verbal or nonverbal. So for someone that has Asperger's, they may or may not understand certain cues the other person might be giving them to go one way or another, and therefore they can end up in a bad situation. However, those kind of subtleties are nowhere near this case. So personally, although these comments are very attention-grabbing, I really don't think that this defense is a very good one. But what do you think? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this, I really hope you did, or if you at least found it informative and interesting, we'd love it if you'd hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. Bravo. And if you really enjoy our content and you want to see more stuff like this, please do subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is uploaded. See you in the next one.